Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today, my guest is Patty Clark. Now, Patty is a maternal advisor artiste, proficient hand letterer and calligrapher, cosmo connoisseur, dandelion warrior, and boy, does she work a lot of hours to empower people with the fabulous comedy book that she's written. So I want to welcome to my show, Patty Clark.
Hi. Well, I'm not sure I was even born with it. I had struggled for so many years that I thought, well, either I can be miserable or turn this into humor. And I couldn't afford therapy, and so the best thing for me to do was jot down my thoughts. The next thing I knew, I was putting stories together and making humor out of it.
Now, interestingly enough, a lot of people write stories. Humor is most difficult, don't you think?
Yes, and I've been told that, and it really is, because I find myself, I have a lot of thoughts in my head, and I put it down, but trying to edit it, to get it to say what I want to say is very difficult. And I try not to write so it's disparaging or a downer.
Right.
I always want my stories to be uplifting, where people laugh and they can say, "Oh, yeah, I can agree with that."
Now, let's hear a little bit about your stories. Tell our audience a little bit about what you've written and what you really had a lot of fun writing.
Well, they came from experiences. A lot of my experience I turned into fun stories, and of course, my kids were always inspiration. You know, you can always write funny things about your kids. So that's where it really started, was the frustrations with kids and life. And you know, it's hard to think up topics, too, but given enough thought and time, I always seem to come up with something.
Now, that's an interesting point. You were just mentioning kids. How have your kids influenced your life? I'm sure that, yes, do you remember some of the shows that were on TV that were funny shows about kids? Give us a couple of ideas of what they did that was really funny or different or interesting for you.
Well, interestingly enough, though, I didn't find much humor when I was raising my kids. I look back now and I think I wish I would have lightened up a lot, not been so hard on myself and so serious all the time. I look back and I see my kids are having kids and you know, just to take life lightly. My oldest daughter gets really frustrated with her daughter. And I said, you know, you just got to lighten up and laugh about this stuff and turn it into humor, each and every incident that happens.
Yeah, but again, I mentioned a moment ago that life is pretty difficult now. And also, the computer has changed the world for them. You know, it's very difficult for kids who are always on the phone, text messaging and doing all kinds of things, to build a sense of humor, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Now,
but my middle daughter, who has a 2-year-old and another one on the way, I've noticed that she doesn't let her daughter watch very much TV, and they interact a lot with her.
That's great.
Which is, I think, better.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about your book. Do you have it in front of you by any chance?
I do.
Okay, so give me a little snippet. Give our audience a chance to kind of get interested in your book. Is there something that you would like to read from it?
Well, the stories might be a little long to read.
Well, just the synopsis, if you would.
Well, each are individual stories. Mm-hmm. So I guess I could read a piece.
Okay, go for it.
I just opened to one that I called Artsy Fartsy. I have done a lot of artwork in my day. It started very young, although I don't recall my drawings ever being displayed on the refrigerator. I thought they were good, but I suppose they weren't refrigerator good. Some of them must have been garbage good when I found a few in the trash. Of course, I did have a rather active imagination, but if I had been a horrid artist and even a horrider child, I would have been drawing skulls and crossbones on doors instead of flowers and people on paper. I asked my mother about my many missing popsicle stick and elbow pasta project pieces. She squirmed delinquently. I'm sure it was very itchy and painful to have to fess up to the fact that she fed the landfill with my fine works of craftsmanship. Mom must have asked me 1,000,000 times to brush my teeth. Eventually, she told me that I didn't have to brush all of them, just the ones I wanted to keep. This is how artistic I really was. She found me in the bathroom brushing, but declared snidely, "Nice use of watercolors, but you were assigned to brush with toothpaste." I could have really made her mad by brushing my teeth with glitter glue or food coloring. I should mention the time that I was sentenced to 4 hours of cabinetry crayon removal service. That night at dinner, she mentioned the benefits of joining art classes in Singapore. She couldn't lose me to another country, not when I became the teen who decorated all the place cards for her dinner parties. I wanted to calligraphy hangover cures, but basic etiquette told me not to, as did my mother. I thought I was being very creative and helpful the times the doorbell rang when somebody was there, and I drew pretty signs and put it outside our front entrance that read, "Doorbell ringers and runners will be executed to the fullest extent by the dog and the boys who reside here." Think about this. My mother had 10 children. Multiply that by crayons, paints, pastels, glue, and palettes of paper. Being left alone to create something with all these things is a pretty strong indication that a gaggle of kids are going to draw, tint, or use stickum on something they aren't supposed to. It's just my rotten luck that sibling 6 leaned on a paint tube, sending the splattering colorant all over sibling 4, and sibling 5 cut and glued the tablecloth. We were blissfully unaware that my mother was hovering nervously from the doorway. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Just because I was the oldest in the birth order and so depended upon, she shot a look at me like she might be contemplating homicide. Funny, after that, she still continued to bring more children into the world. She's lucky that my baby brother's sagging diaper contents that smelled like the Denver Arapahoe disposal site didn't end up being hand-painted all over her furniture. There were several crepe paper rolling Rembrandts running through our house. As a result, Mom ended up being quite skillful in several languages: English, sarcasm, mockery, and profanity.
You call those languages?
Usually with the eldest, there's a spectacular scrapbook saved with many original memories. The youngest is lucky if there's even a hand or footprint from birth. In my case, I don't have anything to show for my work, when my youngest sibling has enough to practically fill a museum. Creativeness also came with stumbling blocks. In one grade school class, we were supposed to draw a feathered dinosaur. I became mystified when the head needed to emphasize reptilian scales. Then I drew feathery arm flaps, but became mentally challenged with the dinosaur's beak. More importantly, how was I going to visually convey the variation from warm-blooded to cold-blooded? The worst part was when someone ran off with my pencil sharpener. I was painting my nails artistically long before salons made it fashionable, which was a very calming and prolific way of expressing myself. Mom would tell me, "Gee, I see you're awfully good-natured today. What medium do I owe that pleasantness to?" I told her that she should be colorfully artistic herself by having all of our names tattooed on her body. But she said that she had already a multitude of tattoos in the form of stretch marks. The day came when I told my parents that I really needed to focus on my art. They wanted to send me to Pratt Institute, one of the leading colleges of art and design, yet they couldn't afford to feed me, much less send me to a prominent school in Manhattan. I sometimes wonder whether it was me or if I heard my mother snickering while saying that she'd rather jet me off to boarding school. Who knows if Pratt would have turned me away saying, "We love your work, but..." Heavily encumbered with my mental collegiate defeat, I was staring down the path of burger flipping, wondering how I would handle the pressure of people who needed something from me when they asked, "Can I have 2 large fries, please?" Instead, I have become extremely well-educated in perseverance, child-rearing, and figs. I found out there are quite a number of things you can do with figs. I've eaten them and used them figuratively when it came to my writing pieces. Better to know extensively about aggregate fruit than possibly become a crack whore. When I lived in Michigan, there was a period when I made chairs out of cut wood and washed up branches from the shores of Lake Erie. I must have built 50 of them, but there were emotional stages of furniture assembly, and it was always when I was in the worst mental states that I cranked out my best artwork. Sometimes I turned a thicket of trees into goddamn sawdust. To think I could have been a carpenter. I never produced anything that Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci might look at, but being creative now keeps me from sitting around aimlessly or taking on other disreputable hobbies, like prank calling people I don't know or choking on big cigars.
Well,
so that's just one story.
Well, it's a very interesting story, and it brings up the point of the personality that you have. It seems to me that people who are very funny, who write funny things, who are comedians, they're known to be very depressed usually. Do you agree with that, or do you think you said, when I was in a bad mood? Well, we're all entitled to have a bad mood, but what about your personality? Do you wake up in the morning and do you say, "Thank God I'm here today, and oh boy, what a life I'm leading, and I'm so lucky to have had 10 people in my family, 10 peers"? Tell me a little bit about you. I want to know, Patty. Just explain to our audience who you are.
As a child, I probably went through a lot of moody periods. It's today that I can wake up and say, "Wow, thank you, Lord, for my life. I'm so grateful for everything I have. I'm a very happy person." Nothing really rattles me now, but it wasn't always that case. I think growing up when you're competing with 9 other siblings in a house takes a toll. And my parents were struggling to make a living and caring for us. So there wasn't a lot of interaction with us kids,
right,
which I missed out on, I feel. And I love my parents dearly. My mom's gone now. My dad's still alive. My dad's a very happy person, too. And all the kids, when you come from a family that big, there's going to be different personalities with, and obviously some of the things you go through in life determine how you act and how you are,
right? Which
is a sad thing, but in all those years I struggled and had such hardships. I guess I made the conscious choice. It was either put a gun to my head or turn it into something constructive and humorous, and that's what I did.
Well, thank God. I mean, it's better to have you here than putting a gun to your head. God forbid. Now, look,
right?
Yeah, and now here's another point. There are a lot of people who write books. Have you ever come across people and shared a lot of your stories with them? And was there anybody famous that you've met who you've been able to discuss your book with?
No, not really. I've discussed it with a lot of unfamous people.
Okay.
And people have asked me, but...
So did people question you a little bit about the things that you wrote?
Well, I had so many people come up to me and say, especially friends, "Where do you come up with this stuff? Like, how do you how do you do this? How do you, first of all, they say I have a specific writing style, and they're curious about my writing style, but mostly, where do you come up with this stuff?
Well, where do you?
It's a natural flow that comes out of me. I can't explain it. The stories, obviously, it's much easier to write about something you know about, for sure.
Yeah.
So the many stories about my family or my kids, that was easy.
So do you have an overall message for your readers?
I do. I say, try to lift yourself up when you're down. Try to take a deep breath when you're stressed. Write down your thoughts. I think one thing I would like to do is tell people to write their memoirs. If they jot down thoughts daily in a little diary or something, and they can go back and they can actually write their memoirs to leave as a legacy for their kids. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. There's no question. People in this world that is so, how do I describe this? This is a world that is really stressful. So, if you're able to write down things and get it all out, it makes you feel good. I know that in my particular case, doing what I do right now with you makes me feel wonderful. Now, on average, how many times did you hurt your head while coming up with all this stuff?
My head never hurt. I poured vodka on my cereal every morning. Just kidding.
But that tells us a little bit about Patty Clark and her humor. So now, without the inspiration from Earthlings, you write, let's talk a little bit about what's going on next, because now you've got started. It seems that you're fairly successful with your book, and you've met a lot of interesting people who've asked you questions and wanted to know a little bit more about you. So you must be doing something right, and there must be something coming up in the future. What have you been thinking about?
Well, I'm on my way to Michigan. That's my home state. I live in California right now, but I'm going back there, and I'm going to see a ton of old friends, and I'm doing a Barnes & Noble book signing in Rochester Hills, Michigan, on a week from Saturday, on the 10th. And then it's a lot of work doing this. I didn't realize how much work there is involved once you publish a book, but I am going to write book 2. I don't know what it's going to be called yet, but I still feel I'm not finished in writing.
So if people want to buy your book, first of all, what's the name of the book and where can they get it?
It's called Damsel in Dis Mess, Dismess, Girly Antics and Other Shenanigans. It's available on Amazon. And I also want to let people know that, the story I read may not be relatable to some people, but a lot of my stories are. And I've had people tell me that, too. Your stories are so relatable, and you tell it in a way that makes it kind of funny.
Funny is good. We talked about funny. Funny is very good. Now, if they want to talk to you a little bit, because you've had a lot of success with this book, and you have, you have knowledge of how you publish, how you get things started. How do they get in touch with you?
Well, they can reach me at damselindismess@gmail.com if anybody wants to write to me.
Okay. And last but not least, I always like my guests to have the last word. So if you have a chance to have the last word, what would you say?
I'd say anybody that does want to write, don't stop writing. Don't get discouraged by anything anyone ever tells you. When I first started jotting my thoughts down, and I put them in stories. I went to a writer's group, and they looked at me like I was out of my ever-loving mind. I couldn't put sentences together. I had so many thoughts, I couldn't say what I really wanted to say, and it took years to hone that, to get it right. And when you go to a writer's group, it really helps you to be a better writer.
Right.
And do a lot of reading and read different kinds of magazine articles or books to get a feel for the different styles of writing. It has really helped me a lot.
You know, I didn't ask you, Patty.
Because you get those rejection letters left and right, and just you can't give up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because it could be awfully frustrating to get a book published, especially by some of the biggest names like Random House, Simon & Schuster. Did you self-publish the book?
No, I did not.
Nothing better than a laugh. So thank you so much, Patty Clark, for being on the Susan Brender Show. And when your next book comes out, let's do this interview again.
Oh, thanks, Susan. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.